closer tonight, meeting face-to-face on the Hill with the woman emerging as the most talked-about potential contender to take her on in the race for the Speaker's gavel. As some Democrats are declaring it's time for not just women, but a woman of color to get a prominent spot in the congressional leadership.
I'm hearing it from lobbyists, from labor, from tons and tons of people. And so there's a great deal of hope and excitement about the fact that there could be new leadership.
New leadership maybe. Good evening, everybody. I'm Ed Henry, in for Martha MacCallum. If Congresswoman Marcia Fudge does run, it would further complicate Pelosi's already shaky quest for the gavel. While several members of the crucial Congressional Black Caucus have expressed their support early on for Pelosi, some now say they're, quote-unquote, waiting to see what happens in the wake of Fudge's potential run. This, as a growing list of Democrats refuse to fall in line, as the week began with newcomers like New York's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez staging a sit-in outside the former Speaker's office. It's ending with freshmen and veteran lawmakers alike hitting the airwaves to voice their concerns about Pelosi being the face and voice of her party.
One of the things that I talked about frequently on the campaign trail was the need to have new voices in Congress, the need to turn a new page.
If we answer that call for new leadership by reinstalling the same status quo establishment leadership that we've had in this party since 2006, then we're letting down the American people.
Our chief congressional correspondent, Mike Emanuel, is live on Capitol Hill again with where Pelosi stands tonight. Good evening, Mike.
Ed, good evening to you. As Ohio Congresswoman Marcia Fudge considers whether to run for Speaker of the House, she made this comparison between House Democrats and the National Football League's lowly Cleveland Browns.
The Browns have the same team today that they had 3 weeks ago. We changed coaches, and they started to win. Same people. Sometimes you just need a different voice. Sometimes you just need a different kind of a vision. But I want to be clear that I have not said anything negative about Nancy because I think she's a very, very good leader.
Fudge's flirtation with running has put prominent African-American House Democrats in an awkward spot. Karen Bass, Hakeem Jeffries, Sheila Jackson Lee, and civil rights icon John Lewis say they're still behind Pelosi, but the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus sounds intrigued about the possibility of Fudge for Speaker.
I'm not anti-Pelosi. Not at all. I consider the Speaker to be a very talented speaker, a remarkable speaker. I consider her to be a friend. But I'm closer to Marcia, so if Marcia ran out, that's where I would be.
Pelosi says she intends to win the speakership with Democratic votes and suggests she has overwhelming support, but she appears to have a math problem with at least 17 Democrats saying they will not support her. Pelosi and Fudge met for 45 minutes today, with Pelosi saying, quote, "We had a candid and respectful conversation." After that, Fudge said she was heading back to Ohio to consider whether she will run.
You said you decide after Thanksgiving. How soon should we expect to hear from you on your decision?
After Thanksgiving.
Well, that could be months after we.
No. It wouldn't be. I mean, literally after Thanksgiving.
Okay.
If Fudge decides to run, time is precious. After all, House Democrats are expected to vote for the next speaker by secret ballot in just 12 days. Ed?
All right, have a good weekend, Fal. Meanwhile,
thank you.
Lisa Booth and Richard Fowler, both are Fox News contributors. They are here tonight. Good evening, both of you.
Hey, Ed.
Good to see you, Ed.
Richard, I'm struck by the comparison to the Cleveland Browns. For people who don't follow the NFL, I'm not sure if you do. Let me see, I checked. Going back to 2016, they've won only 4 games. Is that the best analogy for Democrats tonight?
I'm not sure if that's the best analogy, but here's what we do know. I mean, I think here's the thing: either whether it's Nancy Pelosi or Marcia Fudge, they'd both be incredible speakers. But if Nancy Pelosi is going to win this, I think she's going to have to make a couple of changes. And she said in an interview recently on another network that one thing her father taught her, the former mayor of Baltimore, was you got to know how to count, and she knows how to count. Here are some of the changes that she's going to have to make. 1, I think she's going to have to come up with a succession plan. 2, I think she's going to have to do what the Republican caucus did and create term limits for chairmanships. 3, she's going to have to diversify her leadership team. Right now, a lot of folks on her leadership team probably qualify for Medicaid, or Medicare, excuse me.
Medicare, yeah.
And that's going to have to change. And I think if she makes those changes, I think she could probably see the speaker's mantle once again, making her the first female speaker and the first female to regain the gavel.
All right, well, there's a lot to unpack there. Lisa, let's start with the diversity question, because conservatives have long criticized Pelosi and other Democratic leaders for playing what they call identity politics. And I wonder, when a Democrat like Seth Moulton says, quote, "We need more women, including women of color, in congressional leadership," is that game of identity politics sort of boomeranging on the Democratic leadership now?
Potentially, and that's going to be Nancy Pelosi having to deal with it. But if this wrangling that she's already trying to do to get the speaker's gavel is any indication of what this next Congress is going to look like, she's in a lot of trouble. Because one thing that is really interesting, remember what we've seen with the House Freedom Caucus and the difficulty of Speaker Ryan trying to keep Republicans in line. Nancy Pelosi is going to have the same problem with the Progressive Caucus, and estimates show that they're going to have around 90 members this next Congress. That is a very big voting bloc, and for Nancy Pelosi to try to exert power, particularly with a Republican-controlled Senate and Donald Trump in the White House as a Republican, she's going to need to keep her caucus in line, and that's going to be really difficult for her next Congress. So that is what I'm interested in watching next Congress. I think she's going to have a really difficult time on her hands.
Richard, you can weigh in on that, but I want to follow up. You mentioned the word diversity, and I'm interested. You said that they need to diversify the leadership. As you know, there's already an African-American man in the Democratic leadership, Jim Clyburn, a long-time Democratic lawmaker, and he seems upset, by the way, that there's been this whisper campaign among Democrats, not Republicans, to push him out. Here's what he said in the last couple of days, quote, "Someone came to me over the weekend and told me that they heard when I was whip before, as in majority whip, when the Democrats were in charge, I was a figurehead. The suggestion that as the only black member of the leadership team, he was a token and not an effective leader was tantamount to," quote, what Clyburn says were the little dog whistles that have been floating around this side for a long time. What in the world is happening if Democrats, according to Jim Clyburn, are using racist dog whistles to suggest he's been a figurehead?
I can't speak to that. I was talking about more so diversity in age, right? I think we have a caucus that is very young. You have the youngest members in Congress now, just on the Democratic side, whether it's Lauren Underwood from Illinois, who's the youngest African American in the caucus, to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's the youngest person in Congress, period. So I think we need to diversify in age, but we also need to diversify in how the caucus looks. We have the first Native American woman elected to Congress. We have the first lesbian Native American elected to Congress.
I
and
appreciate
I think
all that, Richard.
Deserve their voice and their say in the caucus.
Right.
And I think to make that a reality, the caucus has to look more like both caucuses and both leadership structures, both the Democrat and the Republican structure, have to look more like the American people. So if you look at the census, that would be, what, 13 or 14% African American, 13 or 14% Latino, just representing how the American people look.
Okay, I want to get Lisa back in, but you didn't answer my question directly. You already have an African American leader in the Democratic leadership. Would you at least admit it's not a good look for the Democratic Party that even Jim Clyburn is claiming that people are trying to push him out?
Well, like I said, I think Nancy Pelosi has a larger problem when it comes to diversifying her caucus leadership overall. I think Clyburn's been a very effective leader, and I think his results speaks for themselves. So if people are trying to push him out and run a whisper campaign, they're making a huge mistake, because Jim Clyburn's one of the most effective legislators, and I would argue, in American history. But beyond, to answer Lisa's point about having trouble with our caucus, we have actually learned from the Republicans in that somebody from the Progressive Caucus is running to be in the leadership, and in all likelihood, points to the fact that they will win.
Doesn't sound like you guys are together, though.
Both MoveOn.org and Indivisibles have already endorsed Nancy
Richard,
Pelosi.
It certainly doesn't sound like you guys are together. And I think one thing that's been really interesting to watch on the left is the fact that Democrats, or at least the establishment, have always done a really good job of keeping their progressive wing of the party under wraps and controlling it. And I think that they've, ever since Hillary Clinton lost, who's obviously an establishment figure, and also the appearance that the DNC was in the tank for Hillary Clinton against Bernie Sanders, now you've got a bunch of progressives that are exerting power. You had a lot of increase of progressives running in primaries, and Democrats had a difficult time keeping those primaries under wraps. So I actually think you've got a big problem on your hands on the left of keeping progressives under control. And I think it's going to be tough for Nancy Pelosi, if she does get the Speaker's gavel, to try to keep them in line.
Go ahead, Richard.
So have fun with that.
But when it comes to here's the difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. When it comes to the issues, Democrats fundamentally agree. We believe that all Americans who have pre-existing conditions should be covered.
You don't agree on who's going to be Speaker right now, it seems.
We agree that we should invest in public education. We agree that prescription drugs should be affordable for everybody.
Single
and
payer?
That's what we're going to Congress to do.
Okay, let Lisa jump in now. Lisa, they can push all those bills, whether it's single-pay health care or whatever, but the Republicans, as you know, Lisa, have an increased majority in the Senate. So the bills they passed, they've still got to get a consensus, don't they?
Right, and those things aren't going to happen, at least looking at things, or at least what progressives want, thing like single payer. That's not going to happen with a Republican-controlled Senate and President Trump in the White House. Republicans have more power than Democrats do at this time. The way that Democrats are going to try to exert power or use their leverage is primarily going to be around spending bills. That's when they're going to be able to try to exercise their power, looking at debt ceiling increases, things of that nature. That's when you're going to see Nancy Pelosi really needing to keep her House in line to try to get concessions from
just
Republicans.
One point to remember is in this past election, 7 million more Americans voted for Democrats than Republicans. And I think Republicans to be very careful.
And you guys haven't controlled the House since
wait a minute.
2010,
Let me just make my point.
Richard. And we
7
won that
million
Senate in
more
2014.
Americans
The White House in
voted for
2016, my
Democrats
friend.
than Republicans. And if you guys want to retain the House and regain suburban Republicans,
congratulations on finally winning.
Maybe you guys should care about pre-existing conditions like we do.
Congratulations on finally winning something.
Lisa,
it's because we care about pre-existing conditions.
Okay.
Richard, you made the point. Lisa,
we care about those things too, and the economy.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, remember when everyone was claiming that Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh would try to lay low during his first few months on the bench? Turns out that's not the case. What happened last?
The missiles have stopped. The rockets have stopped. The hostages are home. The great heroes have been coming home. I probably left Singapore 4 or 5 months ago, and we made more progress in that 4 or 5 months than they've made in 70 years.
Last week, President Trump certainly sounded confident that North Korea was not working on new missiles. But now the regime appears to be testing the U.S., sending very mixed messages. Today, North Korea announcing vaguely that it had tested a quote-unquote newly developed ultra-modern weapon. But hours later, it released a U.S. citizen accused of trying to illegally enter North Korea about a month ago. All this as the U.S. remains publicly optimistic about nuclear talks with the North.
We are in the process of planning another summit between President Trump and Chairman Kim.
Joining me now live, Michael Waltz. He's a Republican congressman-elect from Florida, former Green Beret commander, and former counterterrorism advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. Good evening, Congressman-elect.
Hey, thanks, Ed. Appreciate it.
What do you make about this announcement first from North Korea about this ultra-modern weapon? How significant is it?
Well, I don't know. I don't think we know what to make. But I'll tell you, just from my perspective, I'm increasingly growing very concerned. I was close to the six-party talks when I worked in the Bush administration and saw what can happen when the North Koreans can drag us along. And make no mistake, Ed, their missile engineers, they haven't been taking a vacation the last year. They've been busy little bees. If we remember when they were testing, they got the ICBM in the air, and all they have to do is perfect its reentry capability to be able to strike the United States. And then secondly, we've left the sanctions in place, but sanctions are only as good as the enforcement mechanism. And I don't think for a second that the Chinese and the Russians have kept up the pressure, like where we had them diplomatically a year ago. So I'm increasingly growing concerned, and I think it's also worth remembering that Secretary Pompeo, when he was CIA director last year, estimated we had about 1 year until they perfected that missile capability. I think that's about where we are now. So where are we going with all of this?
Are you afraid then that that Singapore, that the president mentioned, the summit that I attended and covered, that was a stall tactic, and they made nice the North Koreans, and that maybe now they're inching closer to doing something dramatic?
No, I think the president was absolutely right on in having the Singapore summit. What we've tried hasn't worked for decades and decades. Trying something unconventional, I think, was absolutely right. And then it also, look, if we do one day have to go to the military option, he needs to be able to look at the American people and at the Congress and say that he absolutely left it all on the table and tried every option, and the door was absolutely open diplomatically. I think the question is, how long do we leave that door open? Well, and when are we going to see a full disclosure of North Korea's missile sites and their nuclear capability and get the ball rolling towards denuclearization? If we don't, then that pressure needs to amp right back up.
Before the midterms, the president talked about what Vice President Pence mentioned in that soundbite, a second summit following up on Singapore. What are the stakes there if that happens, and what does President Trump need to demand of Kim Jong-un?
Well, I think there needs to be some preconditions, and first and foremost is a full disclosure of their program. Now, the North Koreans are balking at that and saying basically they're handing us a target list. Look, we have a target list, and we could take that program out. It's how are we going to resolve this peacefully so that we don't have to go to that option, which would be absolutely horrific. So I think that precondition has to be in place.
I've got 1 minute. Let's shift to Saudi Arabia, another big story just breaking in the last few moments. The Washington Post broke a story suggesting the CIA has now done an assessment suggesting the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia was behind the assassination of that Washington Post columnist. The Wall Street Journal has just confirmed the story as well. What do you make of that? How serious is that?
Well, I think that's incredibly serious. You know, I mean, that just runs, you know, this type of violence against journalists runs against every grain in American values. We have a lot of hopes on the Crown Prince for reforming not only the Saudi society, but their economy and kind of their place in the Middle East. They're also a bulwark against Iran and an increasingly aggressive Iran. So this is an incredibly serious situation. I am somewhat, you know, I guess somewhat reassured to see a very experienced ambassador going over in former General John Abizaid.
Just nominated
he needs to be on board. Just nominated this week. But, you know, he needs to be on board with the tough line we're taking against Iran as well, and I hope he is.
All right, Congressman-elect Michael Waltz, big President George W. Bush, and a Fox News contributor. Good evening, Carl.
Evening.
That was a dinner in Washington for the Federalist Society, which, as you know, helped the president as a candidate put together that list of potential Supreme Court justices. Now there have been 2 names scratched off the list. How significant is it that conservatives are not only excited about Justice Kavanaugh being on the bench despite all the controversy, but moving forward, the Republicans now have a bigger majority in the Senate, not just for Supreme Court justices, but for all these federal nominations the president's putting up?
Yeah, as Senator McConnell says, the Senate's in the people business. And having 53, it looks like 53 members of the Senate to 47 for the Democrats is going to make the process of confirming not only judicial nominees, but also members of the executive branch a little bit easier. 53 is a magic number. It gives the Republicans on every committee a 2-person majority rather than a 1-person majority. And they've got 30, I think it's 32 judicial nominees who have already come through the Senate Judiciary Committee and are ready for floor action either in the lame duck or in the new session. And there are about a dozen more nominees coming through the Judiciary Committee, I believe, right now.
And you have retiring Republican Senator Jeff Flake this week who tried to block those nominations, at least in the short term, by saying he wanted it tied to a Protect Robert Mueller special counsel bill. And he's been rebuffed by some of his fellow Republicans who have been Trump critics like Bob Corker. What does that tell you about the mood in the Senate among Republicans to get these judicial nominations through?
Well, there's a lot of enthusiasm to get this job done. There are a lot of vacancies. For some reason, the Obama administration did not fill vacancies. They did so early on in 2009 and 10, but the sort of the steam went out of it. So there are a large number of vacancies, and a lot of Republicans see an opportunity to shape the courts in a more conservative and restrained direction for years to come. And so, yes, Senator Flake did make the threat. It was actually not a very meaningful threat because there are 32 nominees who are through the committee. And it's unlikely that there are going to be any additional people who come out through the committee. So all he's doing is delaying the confirmation of those 32 individuals from the lame duck until early next year. So not much impact there.
Carl, we've had about a week and a half for the dust to settle on the midterms. You wrote a very thought-provoking column right after the midterms in the Wall Street Journal where you basically said it was like, to you, a youth soccer game, as I recall. Everybody went home with some kind of a ribbon. The Democrats got the House. The Republicans strengthened the majority in the Senate. But since then, there's been this move on the left to say it was a much bigger night for them than anyone like you anticipated and that there really was a blue wave. What say you?
Yeah, well, as I said in my column, the Republicans suffered a grave defeat in the House, and it's only gotten worse since I wrote that column Thursday after the Tuesday election. The Democrats are up to now, I think, 231. There are 3 seats that they lead in. They could end up being at 235 seats, or 34 seats, excuse me, and the Republicans, leaving the Republicans at 201. That's bigger than we thought it would be on election night. Now, admittedly, a large number of them are small, narrow victories. But a narrow victory is as good a victory. And as I said in my column on that Thursday, the Republicans have got big problems in the suburbs. Take a look at the suburban House seats that we lost. The New Jersey suburbs of both New York and Philadelphia, the Virginia suburbs of Washington, D.C., Richmond, and Tidewater, the suburbs of Charleston, South Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia, Miami, Florida, Chicago, Illinois, the 2 Republican suburbs in DuPage County, suburban Republican congressman gone, and the Democrats elected their first county-wide official in DuPage County, a Republican stronghold, since 1934. And you keep going west, Houston, Minneapolis, St. Paul,
But Carl,
Dallas.
pardon me, what's the answer then? What do you think is the answer? How do Republicans deal with that? And should they take solace in the fact that it's up to, we think, 53 in the Senate?
Yeah, they should take solace in that. And that was because we had a red map, as I said many times during the course of the campaign. You could go back to 1914 and the first election in which we voted for senators by popular vote, not legislatures, and you will never find a map as favorable to the party in power as this map was. But our success there, and I think we're going to build on that success in 2020 and maybe add 1 or 2 more seats, that shouldn't hide the fact that we got a problem in the suburbs. There's no easy answer to it. Our problem is with college-educated voters, particularly college-educated women. And if we don't solve that problem, it's going to be hard to get the House back.
Karl Rove, breaking it down better than anyone. Appreciate you coming in tonight.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
Ed, not only did former school resource officer Scott Peterson ignore a subpoena and fail to show up at the state commission investigating the February shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High, he then turned around and sued the commission, hoping to quash the subpoena. Peterson's attorney came to the meeting, presented the lawsuit, and left without addressing the media, but later issued a statement accusing the commission of not acting as a, quote, neutral fact-finding body and saying it has, quote, succumbed to the not so thinly veiled personal agendas of the commission members. Max Schachter, who sits on the commission and whose son Alex was killed in the shooting, asked if Peterson could be held in contempt. State lawyers are now reviewing that. And commission member Ryan Petty, whose daughter Elena died in the attack, says Peterson is simply causing confusion and delaying the findings. As for Scott Peterson, he has not spoken publicly since he went on the Today Show back in June and said he went by the book. Watch.
I know I didn't violate any policy or procedure. I've been with the agency 32 years. I know the policies. I know the procedures. I communicated right on that scene. I did everything that I felt at the time was appropriate.
After Nicholas Cruz opened fire inside the high school, Peterson failed to enter the building and stood by a brick wall, claiming he didn't know where the shots were coming from Building 1200. But radio transmissions tell a different story. Listen.
I think we got shots fired. Hostile shots fired. 1200 building.
Seconds later, he said again on the radio, quote, we're talking about the 1200 building. Then he told first responders the shooter was on the 2nd or 3rd floor, but warned them to stay away. The father of Meadow Pollack, who died in the attack, has filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Scott Peterson. Listen.
Not only was he a coward, he prevented the other first responders from going inside the building where they could have saved other kids.
Attorneys for the Pollack family will depose Scott Peterson on Tuesday. Peterson's hearing to dismiss the Pollack lawsuit is December 12th. A GoFundMe page to fund Peterson's legal fees has not gotten any donations. Ed.
Trace Gallagher, appreciate that report. My next guest's beloved sister was killed in the attack. Meadow Pollack was shot 9 times. Her family is suing Peterson and others, as you just heard. Hunter Pollack is her brother and is joining me right now. Thank you, Hunter. I appreciate you coming in.
Thank you for having me, Ed.
What do you think, first of all, about Peterson being a no-show?
He didn't show because his lawyer knows he lied. He lied about where he was, what he heard, and what he did. But now he has no choice to show up to a deposition on Tuesday. And if he doesn't, he's entitled to be contempt of court. So we'll see him on Tuesday.
And when he told the Today Show that he did everything that was appropriate, what does that even mean?
He did everything that was appropriate to look out for himself. When he said that my sister was like a child to him, he blatantly lied on live television. He is the biggest embarrassment to police officers in the entire country. He's a coward. He put up a GoFundMe. Can you imagine? He's supposed to be asking for our forgiveness, not trying to raise money for legal fees. And if you actually go back to the GoFundMe page, they took it down because he had more hate comments than he did donations, and that's just embarrassing.
I understand how emotional the situation is. In that Today Show interview, he did say, "I'm sorry for what happened." It doesn't sound like that's good enough, but do you think that was a first step when he apologized to your family and the other families?
No, as a fellow man, what we do when we're sorry is we apologize to each other's faces. It's been 9 months and he's failed to do so. Going on live TV and putting a pity story in front of the nation it's not sincere. He had 9 months. Keep in mind, 9 months, and he's failed to acknowledge the 17 lives that were taken from him. He's hiding somewhere. He could go on TV all he wants, but we're waiting for the face-to-face apology.
Tell me about that lawsuit that your father has filed and what your family is seeking.
We're just seeking to expose him. This isn't about the money. This isn't about the fame. This is about making sure everyone that failed my beautiful sister is held accountable, because I'm pissed off because it's 9 months later and no one's been held accountable. So that's what we're seeking from this.
The shooter is obviously in prison. Who else needs to be held accountable? Sheriff Israel has also been under the microscope. He's still in power as well.
Yep, Sheriff Israel needs to go. He failed to fix the radio failures from Fort Lauderdale. He hired inadequate people to highly ranked positions like Jan Jordan, the captain, who other officers said was ineffective during the shooting. And he failed to require his SROs to go to active shooting training. So now, with the help of DeSantis, we're looking to get rid of Israel come 2019.
So you think,
and then we need to hold our superintendent accountable, too.
Because Ron DeSantis, we believe, has now been elected governor, you believe he's going to hold these officials accountable?
Governor-elect Ron DeSantis knows what went wrong. He knows. He's talked to my family on multiple occasions. And yes, when he is in office in 2019, we are going to drain the swamp of Broward County. Right now, I'm ashamed to live there. It is the laughingstock of the entire country. And me, my father, we want to fix it. We want to make sure Broward County is not full of corruption. For example, I'm a registered Republican in Broward County. I don't even know if my vote counted in the past election. I have friends who served in the military who don't know if their votes counted from absentee ballot. And we need to fix all of this. We need to clean this mess up.
Hunter, meanwhile, as you know, the shooter, I don't even want to give his name, the killer in this case, he's somehow registered to vote in Broward County. How does that make you feel?
It's sickening because this would have been my sister's first election. And due to her being shot 9 times by this kid, she's not able to vote. And he is. So that right should have been taken away from him, but it wasn't. So the sheriff has to give permission for the supervisors of elections office to go in there and register them, and that's just blatantly disgusting.
Hunter Pollack, we can obviously hear the pain in your voice tonight. We grieve with you.
Yep, I'm angry.
We certainly hope your family finds some peace in the days ahead. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Brian Kemp is finally going to be named officially the governor. The president tweeting a moment ago, "Congratulations, Brian Kemp, becoming the new governor of Georgia." Stacey Abrams, the Democrat, fought brilliantly and hard. She will have a terrific political future. Brian, he says, was unrelenting and will become a great governor for the truly wonderful people of Georgia. This comes a short time after Stacey Abrams, the Democrat, you see her there, said this at what was supposed to be a concession speech.
And I will not concede because the erosion of our democracy is not right. Regardless of party, we want what is best for our children.
A prominent female candidate for governor, perfect for ladies' night, where we have Lisa Marie Booth, Rochelle Ritchie, and Jessica Tarliv. Jessica, I want to start with you. How did Stacey Abrams try to get away with saying it's a concession speech, but I'm not really conceding?
I actually think she made the points that she needed to while making it clear Brian Kemp will be the next governor of Georgia. She has accepted the certified results. I think it's 55,000 vote differential, which is actually pretty small considering in Georgia, and she accomplished a tremendous amount. But I think she thought, I have a few more minutes with the national stage, and I'm going to make points about voter suppression in the state and what went on during this election that she deemed inappropriate. And I don't fault her for that after a hard-fought campaign. And for people making the comparison, like Rich Lowry tweeting, like, oh, why wasn't she like Martha McSally? There was nothing funny going on in Arizona. People just wanted Kristen Sinema to win and not Martha McSally.
Well, that's not necessarily true, though, Lisa, right? Because in Arizona, there are a lot of Republicans who believe there was funny business going on, and yet they accepted the results that the Democrat won.
Well, I think Martha McSally was graceful in her exit and concession, and Stacey Abrams was not. And Democrats have alleged that this race was stolen. It absolutely wasn't. She lost fair and square, and now she is being a sore loser. And the things that she is alleging of voter suppression, and Democrats are as well. If you don't like Georgia laws like use it or lose it or exact match, take that up with the Georgia state legislature and get the laws changed there, because Brian Kemp's job as Secretary of State was to follow the laws on the books. And so those claims are absolutely ridiculous. And the shuttering of polling places, that has nothing to do with him. That is up to the counties. So the allegations that are being made against him,
voters. That was
but the implication. No, but there has been finger pointing at Brian Kemp, and
but he should
those
have.
things were not his fault.
He should have stepped down, though. Lisa, you have to admit. I mean, there's really a clear conflict of interest here. I mean, he is the guardian of the electoral process in Georgia, and he's running for governor. I mean, regardless of what, whether people like Abrams or they like Kemp, at the end of the day, to make it fair, he should have stepped down. How is it that the person who is overseeing the vote is running for governor, and on the day of the election, he's overseeing the votes? That's not right.
But Rochelle, you've worked in politics. You know that plenty of Secretary of States have ran for other positions while retaining their office. Alison Grimes did the same thing when she ran against Mitch McConnell in 2014. It's a statewide position. Many people use it as a launching pad for another step. To allege that anything was stolen from Stacey Abrams is ridiculous. Brian Kemp won fair and square. I am sorry she did not win, but act with class and exit with class.
Act with class.
And the same thing goes for people like Bill Nelson, Hillary Clinton, who is still disputing the results of the 2016 election. She's been trying to figure out what happened. What happened was she lost.
Been upset. I get that, but to say that she did not have class during this process is not true. It's not fair.
It was not a concession.
It feels like Ed wants to say something else.
Maybe. Let's talk about Elvis. I wanted to say a lighter topic, and yet the president gives the Medal of Freedom, which is supposed to be a happy occasion, to Elvis Presley, posthumously, of course. And this gentleman, Chris Richards, writes in the Washington Post, a little nod to the good old days, back when black visionaries could invent rock and roll, but only a white man could become the king. Jessica, can't we just give a medal to Elvis Presley, king of rock and roll, without it becoming a controversy?
Yeah, I actually think that this critic from the Washington Post was pretty far out on the limb here. I think there are a lot of things that go on in this administration and from President Trump where you can have legitimate conversations about whether it had racial undertones or overt racist overtones, I guess I should say then. But this one, I am all for Elvis Presley in the medal.
I think, this kind of leads to a bigger conversation to me about you would be very hard pressed to maybe find an American hero that does not have a tattered past in some sort of way. I mean, you can take Abraham Lincoln, for instance. Yes, he freed the slaves, but at the same time, he thought that people that look like me should not be allowed to vote or hold public office. So it just goes to this notion that in America, you can be considered a racist or you can dabble in racism and still be a hero. Now, as far as Elvis, James Brown and B.B. King said a lot of positive things about Elvis. And so, I just think there's bigger issues right now. And I don't think that, I'm going to lose anything as a result of Elvis getting the Medal of Freedom. I just really don't.
I'm pretty sure President Trump has said I could cure cancer and people would still criticize me for it. And that is absolutely true with President Trump. He can't do anything without being criticized. You look at the list of people that he chose to reward. You look at Elvis, who's the king of rock, Babe Ruth, one of the greatest greatest baseball players of all time. Antonin Scalia, one of the most revered Supreme Court justices, unanimously confirmed at the time. So Miriam Adelson, even, who he's been criticized for
donor,
taking,
right?
she deserves it. Tom Hanks, Ellen DeGeneres were all donors of President Obama.
I thought rich donors just got ambassadorships, though, Lisa. Now they're getting presidential medals.
She is a doctor who has dedicated her life to fighting substance abuse and helping people who have those problems. So she has done a lot of good in this world as well. So people make so much over everything with this.
What did Elvis do?
He's the king of rock. He shaped music
these
for
medals,
a
to be
long
fair,
time.
often are about
It was
cultural
a lot of
achievement.
cultural appropriation with his music as well.
Cultural contributions
Can we
are
talk about
part
that
of
weird
what is
comment
considered
he made, though,
for the presidential medal.
Scalia's wife?
What did he say?
About how many kids they had, and it was like the weird, like,
He wanted to say they had a big family.
Yeah.
Jessica, Rochelle, Lisa, thanks for coming in. That's the story for this Friday night. Martha is back Monday night. I promise she's back. She had a sore throat. We love her. A busy night for me. I'll be hosting Fox News tonight at 11, Fox and Friends tomorrow. Thanks for starting your Friday night with us. Tucker's.